Part 144. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Zhu. Chapter 1433. Everyone was shocked when they heard the words, and the princes looked at their father in disbelief. Qi Xiaoyuan looked down at his sons indifferently, pointed to the open space in the middle and said, 3 against 3, let's fight until you don't want to. A light flashed in Xiaofu's eyes, and he clenched his fists eager to try. Everyone pushed away immediately, and there were only 6 people left in the field. Beizhu, Xiaofu, and Xiaobeizai are eager to try, but the 4th prince and others are a little panicked, and more angry. The royal father is partial to outsiders, obviously they are the royal father's children. When the 3rd prince looked at Beizhu again, he lost 3 points of taboo. Although he didn't dare to beat her with all his strength, he would fight back. Even if the heirs of the royal family are not good at martial arts, they have to start learning riding and archery and some basic martial arts after the age of 6, so everyone played pretty well at first. But Beizhu and Little Leopard were strong and fought with all their heart. Even though they were both protecting Xiaofu, they were able to fight against the 3 who were much older than them. The 3 princes gradually became angry, their fists and kicks became sharper, and they became a little disorganized. Xiaofu even vented all the gloom in his heart, ignored the fists that landed on him, kicked the 4th prince in the stomach, flew forward and pressed him down to beat him. Beizhu and Xiaobeizai rushed forward to help him stop the 5th and 6th princes. The 4th prince was punched several times, so he just rolled on the ground with Xiaofu in his arms and punched him several times, pressed him under him and stretched out his hand to punch him in the face. Seeing this, Beizhu punched the 6th prince to the ground, then turned around and went to catch the 4th prince. The 4th prince had already punched Xiaofu several times, and was about to fight again, but someone grabbed him by the back of the neck, and he was dragged to the ground in one fell swoop. Xiaofu wiped the blood from his face, got up and continued to beat the 4th prince. There was a scuffle in the arena, even the Little Leopard was punched several times. The only one who was not injured was Beizhu, not only because of her high force value, but also because every time someone wanted to beat her, the Little Leopard jumped over to block her from time to time. It was Xiaofu made her a meat shield. Qi Xiaoyuan kept watching with a smile on his face, but Eunuch Wan knew that the Holy Majesty was angry. There was no smile in his eyes at all, and the cold air on his body was still radiating out. The accompanying readers waiting on the side were drenched in cold sweat. It was the first time they saw the princes fighting like this, and there was even a princess in it. I don't know if they will be angered after today. 4 of the 6 children were exhausted from the beating, and they fell to the ground in a state of embarrassment. The standing Beizhu and Xiaobeizai also had blue and red spots on their faces, panting heavily and staring at the people on the ground. At this time, the sun was setting, and there was only half of the sun left in the sky. The glow in the mid-air shone on people's faces, which was warm and gorgeous, but everyone's heart seemed to be immersed in an ice hole. Seeing that they were no longer moving, Qi Xiaoyuan asked, "Finished?" Xiaofu struggled to get up. Beizhu and Xiaobeizai rushed to help him. The 3 of them sat on the ground together, looking up at the emperor sitting on the chair. Xiaofu nodded seriously. "It's over." Qi Xiaoyuan asked with a smile, "Is the anger over?" Xiaofu felt it carefully. Although his body was aching and tired, his heart was as happy as a feather flying in the air. He smiled and nodded. "It should be over." Satisfied, Qi Xiaoyuan got up and squatted in front of him, patted his head and said, "Then, will Xiaofu still want to be friends with your 3 cousins in the future?" Xiaofu struggled for a while, before saying, "Look at their performance." "Good job." Qi Xiaoyuan turned his head to look at Beizhu and Little Leopard, and said solemnly, "It's wrong to fight. It seems that you haven't learned your lesson from yesterday's punishment. Your father will come to pick you up later. I have to be good talk to him." Little Leopard and Beizhu's eyes widened, and they shouted, "Uncle Huang, you agreed with us to fight." Qi Xiaoyuan blinked slyly and said, Don't tell me you won't fight if I don't agree with you. Bezu, don't forget that you climbed over the wall to enter the upper study. Tell Uncle Huang what you want to climb over the wall and enter the upper study. Bezu lowered her head guiltily. Qi Ziyuan then looked at his three sons. He couldn't help sighing. He knew the thoughts of the fourth and fifth children. Half of them bullied Xiaofu because they didn't like Xiaofu, and half of it was because of other things. As for the sixth child, Qi Ziyuan looked at the youngest son, feeling even more exhausted in his heart. This is just a silly boy who even counts the money for them after being sold by his two elder brothers. He is obviously his kind, but he looks as stupid as Hao Ran. He directly picked up the youngest son and put it aside, squatted in front of the fourth and fifth children, stared at them for a while, until they all lowered their heads with guilt and said, "Do you know why the father promised you to fight this?" The fourth and fifth children were at a loss. He said to his two sons seriously, "You are older than Xiaofu and the others, but you can't beat Little Leopard and Bezu in fights, and you can't compare with Xiaofu in reading. Apart from reincarnation, what are you better than them?" Qi Ziyuan looked into their eyes and said softly, "If you hadn't been born as princes, would you have survived in this world?" The faces of the two teenagers changed. Filial piety and fraternity are not just teachings in books, even Bezu knows that brothers and sisters are respectful and filial to parents. "Have you ever thought about how much your behavior will make my father and me sad?" Qi Ziyuan said here with tears in his eyes, standing up slowly with hands on knees. Eunuch Wan hurriedly stepped forward to support the emperor. It took 5 years for Prince Rong to restore the emperor's physical condition to a normal level. Nothing happened to him. Qi Ziyuan held Eunuch Wan's hand and turned to leave, ignoring the children. The fourth and fifth princes were paralyzed on the ground, their faces turned blue and white, and their hearts were sour and astringent, very sad. The fourth prince lowered his eyes and thought, did he really do something wrong? But the mother and concubine said that he is also the son of the emperor, and those who are able in the world live in it. He obviously has this opportunity to embrace the world, so why is he not even qualified to fight for it? The fifth prince was equally confused. The accompanying readers who also heard the deeper meaning of the emperor were all at a loss. Only Bezu and Little Leopard were at a loss, wondering why the atmosphere suddenly became so strange. The Little Leopard scratched his head, took his sister's hand and said, "Forget it, the fight is over, let's go home, we can't wait for Daddy to pick us up, or we will definitely be beaten." Bezu hurriedly went to pull Xiaofu, but Xiaofu waved her hand away, stumbled to the fourth and fifth princes, and said mockingly, "So that's what I said, you are all because I am better at reading and writing than you, Huahua is better than you, and even IQ is better than you, so you bully me like this? After all, we are also cousins, and we played in mud and went to the market together when we were young, so it was for the throne." Xiaofu snorted softly and looked down at them disdainfully, "You are worthy? Are you better at reading than the prince's elder brother, or are you better at martial arts than him? Or are you better at knowing people and using them better than him? Even a child like me can't compare. Just because you can't beat me, you just want to be a prince? You are so beautiful." The faces of the fourth and fifth princes turned red, and they shouted, "You spitting blood, when did we ever want to be princes?" Although they thought about it, how could they say such thoughts? Isn't this fatal? The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1434. No matter what the fourth and fifth princes thought, Xiaofu's anger came out anyway, and although there were occasional fights in the upper study room, they were no longer as tense as before. But their mothers and concubines Shipin and Lupin completely hated the three of them. It was widely said that their son wanted to fight for the position, but they were reprimanded by the emperor before, which was equivalent to pushing their mother and son to the forefront. If some thoughts are not spoken out, everyone should just wait and think about them, but once they are spoken out, they will be pushed into a situation where they will never be restored. Xiaofu pointed out to their face that their intent to seize the heir apparent was not nefarious. If the fourth and fifth princes sincerely repented and found the prince to cry, the matter would be over with their brotherly feelings. However, they were not decisive enough. Although they felt guilty and regretted, they went back to find their mother and concubine first. Both Shipin and Lupin's natal families were involved in the seizure of the heir apparent, and were even involved with many ministers in the court. Their son was just being pushed forward by them. Therefore, in just one night, the fourth and fifth princes not only disappointed Qi Xiaoyuan, but also the prince who had always been friendly and accommodating to them was also discouraged, and began to suppress their joint ministers. Little Treasure has never formed a clique for personal gain, and his fourth aunt told him since he was a child that the princes and emperors of all ages have been at odds with each other. It is difficult to avoid this, so he never hides anything from his father, and he never forms a party. The reason why all the officials support him is because he is the prince appointed by the emperor, and he is orthodox. Except for Rongxian and his husband, Xiao Bao seldom interacted with the courtiers in private, and this time his suppression was also above board. He asked Qi Xiaoyuan for power. He said, "Father, although the fourth and fifth brothers have made mistakes, they are still young, and I don't want to let them go so that our relationship will deteriorate." Xiaobao said calmly, "So I want to suppress their influence. If they can still seize the throne under this circumstance, it means that my son is inferior to others." Qi Xiaoyuan asked sadly, "How are you going to deal with them?" "It depends on how far they go, but as long as they don't attack our relatives, I will definitely treat them kindly. Although I can't use them like my second brother, I should have opportunities." Xiaobao is serious, he said. "They are also father's sons, and they have a share in this family business." Qi Xiaoyuan felt relieved when he heard the words, nodded and said, "Then you can do it, but I don't want my court to become a battlefield for power and profit, and for selfishness." Xiao Bao nodded, and solemnly assured, "The imperial court is a place where officials handle state affairs and seek the well-being of the people. My son will not put the cart before the horse." Qi Xiaoyuan sighed, "The grievances in Xiaofu's heart should be gone now, right? This is also karma. If the fourth and fifth children hadn't bullied Xiaofu back then, Xiaofu would not retaliate against them like this now. The prince who directly pushed him to suppress them made them unable to stand up again." Xiaobao lowered his eyes and didn't speak, but he was very grateful in his heart, thanks to his father's big heart, and his cousin was raised by his father like a son, with deep feelings. Otherwise, if Xiaofu did this trick, not to mention his father would hate Xiaofu, at least there will be a estrangement with Uncle Zijin, and there may be some big troubles. After Xiaofu made the fuss, he happily went home with the ignorant little leopard Beizhu. On the way, he said excitedly, "Even if I'm locked up in the ancestral hall for 10 days and half a month, I won't lose money." Little Leopard and Beizhu looked at him in horror. "It's just a fight, isn't it?" Xiaofu looked at them contemptuously and said, "You are so stupid. The point is not that we fight, the point is that I let out those words. Let's see who dares to find the fourth and fifth to form a party openly, thinking that his life is not long enough. Those who surrendered in private are afraid that they can't wait to hit the wall at this time, right? The elder brother of the prince would not make friends with officials in private even if he was a prince, and the Li family was even more low-key and restrained and did not dare to show off. Don't kill them. But this time there is another person who is the most deceitful, and that is Fan Zijin. There is a cheating son. Fan Zijin almost vomits blood. The whole world belongs to Qi Xiaoyuan, let alone the court. If he hadn't been poisoned suddenly 5 years ago, there might not have been a battle for the heir apparent. Although the fourth prince and the fifth prince had disagreements, firstly, they were young, secondly, they had been in business for a short time, and thirdly, the historians and the Lu family low status. Therefore, there are not many officials who voted for them in the court, and even if there were, most of them had other thoughts. For example, using the names of the two princes to get promoted and make money. Don't support the orthodox crown prince who is knowledgeable and noble, and think about how upright and honest officials who go astray can be. So Xiaobao borrowed his father's contacts to check, and easily dismissed several officials. For a while, the officials who had close contacts with historians and the Lu family were all in danger. Even Yan Du couldn't help but raise his heart. And the officials who followed Yan Du to the fourth prince's family lived in seclusion, for fear of being caught by the prince. They couldn't hate the prince who stood behind the emperor, but they didn't have any obstacles in their hearts towards the Fan family. They felt that the reason this matter got out of control was because of Fan Zijian's second son's unrestrained speech. Is it possible to talk nonsense about seizing the heir? So they hated Xiaofu to death, and Fan Zijian even more. Fan Zijian had just gained a firm foothold in the cabinet, but the situation began to become chaotic again. He hated Xiaofu, the culprit, so much that his teeth itched because he was bullied in the palace before, and it was not easy to punish him for a big change in his temperament. Carried him to the ancestral hall and knelt for 2 hours, couldn't help but spanked him, and then ordered him to contemplate behind closed doors in Prince Rong's mansion for half a month. Why is it in Prince Rong's mansion? Because the security measures in Prince Rong's mansion are strong enough, and Qi Heiran has been so busy recently that he is spending time with Mu Yang at home, so he is not worried about his son being assassinated or robbed in the mansion. Secondly, Xiaofu was beaten so hard that he couldn't get out of bed. Little Leopard was also beaten so badly that he couldn't see anyone at the right time, and Beizu was even sick, so the son who has a partner will no longer try to sneak out to play. Fan Zijian felt that he could relax and deal with these officials who made trouble for him. If he dares to form a clique for personal gain, it doesn't look like he is a good person. Let's see how he deals with them. Therefore, Beizu, who had not yet entered the palace to study, had another half-month of rest time, and was extremely happy. But before she got excited, she fell into Mu Yangling's clutches. Mu Yangling expressed dissatisfaction with her daughter rolling up her sleeves and jumping over the wall to fight. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1435. The fight she allowed is completely different from the behavior of throwing off the maid and nanny to climb over the wall to find a fight. So Mu Yangling rolled up his sleeves and was about to beat up his daughter. Qi Heiran probably knew that his daughter was in trouble this time, so he didn't dare to stop him, but followed Mu Yangling's buttocks and persuaded, calm down, don't worry about it, angry at myself. Beizu was so frightened that she stood on the spot, was slapped on the buttocks twice before she came back to her senses, opened her mouth and cried wow, crying aggrievedly, you just dislike me as a daughter, isn't it because you are afraid that I will marry you, don't you want to go out? At worst, I don't want to marry, and I don't want you to support me, I want my father to support me. Mu Yangling raised his eyebrows angrily and asked, who told you these words? Qi Heiran was also anxious, and squeezed forward to comfort his daughter, who is talking nonsense. Tell Dad, see if I don't beat them up. Beizu turned around and hugged her father's waist, and continued to cry, the tears were falling like strings of beads, it was really sad to see. Qi Heiran froze and looked at Mu Yangling anxiously. His daughter is 10 years old, and Qi Heiran has rarely hugged her since she was 8 years old, and he feels a little uncomfortable being hugged at this moment. Mu Yangling didn't receive his brain waves, but was just thinking deeply about why his daughter had such a reaction. Pretend. Impossible. Beizu's character is like her and Heiran's, unless it is really wronged, it is impossible to cry. But the point is that none of them wronged her. Because she is a girl and the only daughter in the family, Mu Yangling puts her on the apex of her heart. Her sons are raised extensively and half-raised, but her daughter is pampered. Mu Yangling has always felt that childhood and adolescence are the most beautiful period, so she will let the children do whatever they want without delaying their studies. So Basil likes to play with her older brothers and cousins. Every day it feels like rolling around in the mud. She closes her eyes and pretends not to see it, as long as the girl doesn't play naughty in the mud when she goes out with her as a guest. She doesn't like female workers who are always difficult, and she doesn't force it. Anyway, she is not very good at being a mother. There were fights and quarrels between siblings, and it was probably her brothers who supported her, so she was stricter in assigning responsibilities. If it was her fault, she must admit it. But Chi Heiran is about to praise his daughter to the sky. If she doesn't correct it, it doesn't matter if she raises a female bully, but what if she raises a female dandy who is dedicated to doing evil? She wouldn't even be angry with her daughter, let alone Chi Heiran, a 24-year-old father who said her fart was stinky, so he would say such things to bully her? She also excludes her sons, because the family's yang is strong and yin is weak. Although the boys in the family often argue with their sister, they will never underestimate Beizhu, let alone say that they despise her as a daughter. Because of Chi Heiran's different treatment, Hutu and Xiaobeizai regretted that they were not daughters more than once. Mu Yangling ruled out his family members, and frowned again thinking about his servants, but don't say that the servants in the family don't have the guts. Even if he really said such a thing and let his daughter hear it, with his daughter's temperament, she should use a whip to beat him. People kicked out, instead of aggrieved themselves crying. Mu Yangling couldn't find the suspect, but Beizhu was still crying in Chi Heiran's arms. As soon as she looked up, she saw her father standing there with a froze face, helpless. The tears flowed more fiercely, and she stretched out her hand to hold her father, pushing it away, leaning on the table and saying, "Even daddy despises me." Chi Heiran waved his hands at a loss. No, dad didn't dislike you." Mu Yangling came back to his senses, quickly pushed her husband aside, raised her daughter's face, wiped her tears carefully with a handkerchief, and said helplessly and seriously, "Why do you think that father and mother despise you? We treat you much better than our brothers. If we despise them, we despise them." Beizhu sniffled and said, "Then why doesn't daddy hold me anymore, and now he still sleeps in the same bed as brother and the others?" "What a silly child," Mu Yangling said with a smile. "Men and women have different seats at the age of 7, even father, daughter, mother and son. Do you think your brothers still sleep with their mother now? But 2 days ago, you and mother is asleep." Beizhu blinked, and tears rolled down her eyelashes. Mu Yangling continued to wipe her, and asked softly, "Why do you say that mother dislikes you as a girl?" Beizhu lowered her eyes, pointed her toes and said, "That's what people outside say. A woman has to marry, and then she is attached to a man for the rest of her life. Happiness and joy are all placed on him, and men in the world love gentleness and gentleness girls like me. They definitely don't like me, and I won't be able to get married by then, and you will be so anxious that your hair will turn gray, and it will delay your traveling around the world, and you will definitely hate me by then." These words were overheard by Beizhu when she went out as a guest. She has lived with her parents in other places since she was a child. In the past 5 years, she has traveled all over the country, and when she was younger, she lived in Guangzhou. Although she lived in the capital for a while, because of her young age, she is not familiar with the ladies in the capital. It should be said that she didn't know anyone well in the capital except her relatives in the palace. So when they went out as guests, although everyone flattered and agreed to her because of her status, they would say anything when they turned around. And her hearing has inherited her mother's talent to a certain extent, plus she has practiced martial arts since she was a child, so her ears are not very good. Obviously I don't want to hear it anymore, but I can always hear it. So, she heard a lot about the troubles of those sisters who were only 3 or 4 years older than her. For example, the aunt at home and the sisters who were concubines became demons again. The teaching requirements in women's schools are becoming more and more stringent, and they need to spend 12 points of energy to pass the exam. The family wants to propose marriage to them, and the grades of women's school will also become a capital to talk about marriage, but they are not famous enough, their reputation is not obvious, it is difficult to talk about a good marriage. Then everyone can always change the topic and talk about her. Most of the girls say that they are gentle, and it is difficult to find a good husband. What will happen to the princess who was brought up like a man in the future? I heard that Prince Rong took the little princes of the palace out to hunt yesterday, and the princess was also dressed in riding clothes and followed. I heard that this princess is as powerful and jealous as her mother, Princess Rong. Who would dare to marry her in the future? In this era, it is normal for a man to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. After falling back, someone even lowered their voices and said, "Don't look at the princess who is so much loved now, when she can't get married in the future and becomes a burden to the royal family and Prince Rong's mansion. I don't know how the princess will despise her." That's right, if there is a daughter who can't get married, won't it implicate the granddaughter behind? But there are also some people who object, it may not be impossible to get married, there are always those who admire the power of the palace, the princess can do nothing else, but the father and brother love her, this alone is not enough for many men to flock to her. But what kind of person can such a person be? Beza wanted to vomit blood when she heard this, and felt that it would be better if she just didn't get married and was lonely for the rest of her life. Unfortunately, because Beza passed the 10-year-old mark, there are more things to learn. The new fixed items include female workers, cooking skills, matching clothes, and housekeeping. The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1436. Beza couldn't help being somewhat conflicted, and the reason Mu Yangling used to persuade her was, "You are already a big child, and you will be able to marry in a few years. These are things that must be learned. You don't want to be proficient, but at least you can't be too good at it." Difference. Female workers, you have to know how to make shoes and clothes by yourself. Whether you can wear them outside is the second thing. The key is that you have to learn all the steps. This is a survival project. That's right, Mu Yangling made this a survival project, not a necessary skill to please men and be a good wife and mother. In her opinion, anything can happen in this world, and her daughter is not safe, who knows what will happen in the future. Naturally, she doesn't have to make her own clothes at home, but if she gets into trouble accidentally, she doesn't want to make beautiful clothes, but at least you have to know how to make them, so that you won't face the embarrassment of being naked one day. Cooking skills, you have to cook the food yourself and eat it. As for cooking for her husband to have a flair or something, if her daughter has this interest, she will not stop her. If not, she should take care of herself to fill her stomach first. This is also a survival project. The latter two are for her daughter to live more comfortably in the future. There is no woman who does not love beauty. Dressing and matching will be a very important lesson. This kind of thing is almost the instinct of officials and family members, so there is no need to study it specially. Seems to be a little different from everyone else. It may also be because she can't embroider. After all, the first thing a female worker needs to learn is wiring, but her daughter. Since her daughter was unwilling to spend time on embroidery, she had to teach her a special course to make up for this part. After all, everyone wants to look beautiful when they go out. So the course of dressing and matching is to make my daughter more beautiful physically and mentally, but it seems that my daughter doesn't appreciate it. As for the housekeeper looking at the accounts, she didn't want her daughter to be bound by housework and general affairs, but she also didn't want her daughter to be fooled. Just like her, she is in charge of all the properties in the palace, but it is impossible for her to do the accounting of every book. She can hand it over to the steward, or even ask the accountant to do it, but she can also understand the books by herself. You don't need to understand the deep level, but at least you have to understand the superficial account books, otherwise the servants may fool you like this. Because Beza has just turned 10 years old, she is still young, and the requirements for these 4 courses are not strict, so the time is very wide, and she only takes several classes a month. Anyway, her daughter is still young, and she only needs to learn it before she is 16 years old. That's fine. Mu Yangling thought that her setting was loose enough, compared to other people's ladies who followed their mother all day long to learn how to be a housekeeper, but unexpectedly, it aroused her daughter's resentment. The timing was bad too, right after she had heard the gossip. Mu Yangling could only explain to her one by one, and took himself as an example. Mother's workmanship and cooking skills are not good, and she is not even gentle enough. Didn't she marry your father too? She stroked her daughter's hair and said, Mother doesn't want you to change yourself just to get married. No one in this world has exactly the same personality, and likes and dislikes are naturally different. Could it be that all the women in this world are gentle people? If they are not gentle, no one will like them. Your father likes to eat meat, especially braised pork, which is fat and thin, but your uncle Zijin likes light food. When they eat at the same table, if no one forces them, they will never eat each other's favorite dishes. Beza rolled her eyes and said, half understanding, it's like my mother likes spicy food, but my second aunt likes sweets. Even if I don't learn from them, there will always be someone who likes me. Mu Yangling nodded approvingly, and said seriously, we have never disliked you as a daughter, and you shouldn't underestimate yourself. Just listen to those gossips, and you don't have to be serious with them. Chi Heiran's face was ugly. How can you let it go if you have heard it? What kind of family do you go to as a guest, and the children in the family are too talkative? Then she said to Beza distressedly, Beza, you are my master's daughter, the princess of Daki, and you are so outstanding. How many men in this world want to marry you? Why can't you get married? Mu Yangling glared at him, and said, Beza is good, but not so good. Let me tell you, you can't force your child's marriage, or if there is resentment, I will let Beza come back to you every day cry. Beza immediately turned her head to look at her father, looked at him with dark eyes, and said seriously, Father, my marriage must be approved by me. Chi Heiran, who was about to inspect the sons of his colleagues the next day, immediately nodded guilty. After comforting his daughter, Chi Heiran immediately threw her out, turned around and complained to Mu Yangling, why are those little girls so talkative, they really dare to say anything. He despised Mu Yangling again. Now you have women's schools blooming everywhere. I thought women are much stronger now, but I didn't expect it to be so. Mu Yangling said calmly, that's because Beza didn't meet any good ones. You can go to the folks to see now. In the common people, anyone who has gone to women's school can be half of the family at home, and has the right to speak. It's also bigger than before. She squinted at her husband and said, if you really want to give your daughter a good atmosphere, you can persuade your elder brother to let a woman be an official if you have the ability. I swear, as long as a woman can be an official, there will be no one in another 50 years look down on women. How is this possible? Chi Heiran jumped up, you still think I don't have enough troubles? Mu Yangling pouted, but didn't force it. She also said that, now that women's status is slowly rising, she dare not make such a big commotion at this time, otherwise blood will flow into rivers, or all previous efforts will be in vain. Let the children work hard for what will happen in the future. Mu Yangling turned around and was about to go to the kitchen, when he suddenly jumped up and said, no, I was fooled by Beza. I asked her to ask her a crime, why did she go away like this? Chi Heiran looked at her with disdain, shook his head and said, you really don't have a good memory when you're old. I thought you just let your daughter cry so pitifully, you just forgot. Mu Yangling turned around and was about to look for her daughter again. Chi Heiran quickly stopped her, okay, what's the big deal, isn't it just a fight? If you want me to say that the fourth and fifth children deserve a beating, now the three children are grounded. It's over. How can it be passed? Xiaofu and Xiaobeizai are fine, but Beiza climbed over the wall and went in to fight. This nature is twice as serious as the two of them, okay. She must be punished severely, otherwise she will fight in the future still have to be lawless. Beiza loves Xiaofu so much, she's venting her anger on Xiaofu. Chi Heiran defended her daughter, didn't you teach them to love each other and help each other? She grew up with Xiaofu, not much like when me and the others in terms of feelings, she naturally turned to Xiaofu. Xiaofu was so pitiful when he was sent to us, didn't you say you would beat them up? Daughter, this is also a friendly brother. Mu Yangling said to him seriously, I had them beat me up at our house before. Chi Heiran said in a bachelor way, obviously that meal didn't calm them down. The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1437. Half a month later, the children returned to study in the upper study room. At this time, not only Xiao Beizai and Xiao Fu had been selected as companions, but also Beiza's companions had been selected. The three children went to school in high spirits, and the fourth and fifth princes had recovered from the initial few days of sadness and anxiety. They are relatively young and have few opportunities to leave the palace, so they don't know that most of the officials who have taken refuge in them have been pulled out by the prince. Because those officials were all in contact with their mother clan, Shipin and Lupin would not inform them of the outside situation, lest they would be more discouraged after being hid by the emperor. You know, they had somewhat listened to what the emperor said to them when they were reprimanded face to face, and they hesitated and regretted it after returning to the palace. Regardless of whether it was Shibin or Lubin, they all bet on the entire family. The fourth and fifth princes reign in the precipice, the emperor will not blame them anymore because they are his sons, but the historians are different from the Lu family. For them, there is no arrow to turn back. It will be beyond redemption, not only the emperor will question the crime, but the official families who were implicated by them will not let them go. Shibin and Lubin did not dare to bet. So they all took 120,000 points of energy to appease their sons. So when they came back to school again, although the fourth and fifth princes were not as targeting Xiaofu as before, they were not very friendly. But Xiaofu is no longer afraid of them, not to mention the older lion and tiger brothers guarding him, and the little leopard who is inseparable from him, they can't bully him. What's more, next door is the place where Beiza studies. If he shouts loudly, the people from the other side will come running over, 3 against 2, no one can bully them. The sixth prince was no longer willing to play with his two elder brothers after Qi Ziyuan instructed him. Recently, he likes to follow the third prince. So it is Xiaofu who is going to bully now, and they bully the fourth and fifth princes in turn. The servants in the study room were replaced a lot, and Mu Yangling came forward to rectify it. Not to mention the restoration of the Qingming when the country was first founded, at least the servants did not dare to accept bribes, and stepped down. The servants in the upper study room did not complain. Although the rules are strict, they are strict as a whole. Princess Rong has stricter requirements on the masters. She will never allow any bullying of the palace servants in the upper study room, and will not raise it to the height of character inspection. Therefore, although their extra money is reduced, their life safety has also been greatly improved. At first they didn't quite understand why the princess had to be so strict with the masters, but after seeing the occasional battles between the little masters, they understood. In the past, the little masters also fought, but most of the time it was one side who had won over and bullied the other side, and they must have been behind their backs, hiding from the husband and the palace. But since the young masters of the palace entered the palace people felt that the atmosphere in the study room had changed, from night to day at once. In the past, the war between the masters was like a poisonous snake in the night. Although it was dangerous, it was also extremely silent, just like a poisonous snake lurking in the dark looking for the right time to attack. But after these little masters were added to the study room, it suddenly became a battlefield under the blue sky and white sun, with swords, lights, and swords, and all plans exposed to the sun. The little masters could fight in front of the Teifu. Since then, it has become normal for the masters of the upper study to be punished to kneel at the door of the imperial study, and it has become common to hear the roars of the gentlemen in the upper study. The old man who went to the study room sighed. It was like this not long after the study room was built. Although there are only 2 children, the prince and the Prince Rong's son, they are still flying around every day. Naturally, it soon became the norm for parents to enter the palace. Among them, Mu Yangling and Qi Heiran entered the palace the most times. There is no way, it seems that her children are there every time there is trouble and fight. Mu Yangling came forward to be trained on behalf of Beizhu, while Qi Heiran represented the boys. After Fan Zijian entered the palace twice, he resolutely handed over the matter to Qi Heiran. He had good reasons. Anyway, you will definitely be called into the palace when I enter the palace, and Ziofu is now being raised by you and Aling, so you can't do it? Have you suffered? It's so good to have an agent. Qi Heiran can't refute it at all. Xiao Xia was very embarrassed, and had taken the initiative to enter the palace twice, but on behalf of the boys who entered the palace to be instructed by the master, they were all fathers, and she was the only mother. Not only was she uncomfortable, but the husband also had an ugly face. Therefore, she stopped going after entering the palace twice, and continued to ask Qi Heiran to make up for it in private. The way she compensates is to be good to Qi Heiran's precious gem, so that Beizhu will be as good as her mother and daughter in just 1 month, and even Mu Yangling will retreat, so that Mu Yangling can eat it endlessly. Mu Yangling was still jealous, but Qi Heiran realized something was wrong. Why does Ziofu's shadow appear in every time his daughter gets into trouble? Qi Heiran rubbed his chin, and went to the small study of the 3 children after turning around halfway. The 3 children were all in the study room, and the little leopard was sitting on a chair with a pen scratching his head, thinking hard, before writing his homework for a long time. On the other hand, Xiaofu was busy doing his homework very fast, while Beizhu was sitting beside him holding a book and reading it, covering his mouth and laughing from time to time. How can you laugh like that when you read a serious book? Qi Heiran stood outside the window and watched quietly. Just when he thought it was his carelessness, the little leopard climbed up on the chair to look at Ziofu's homework, and wailed, "It's not finished yet, our homework is not finished yet, can't you do ours first?" He turned his head to stare at his sister again, and shouted, "Can't you write it yourself? You must let Ziofu write it for you, and let your husband know later, and see how he punishes you." Beizhu said confidently, "No, brother Ziofu imitated the handwriting very similarly, sir won't doubt it." He despised him again and said, "Can't you think about it yourself? You always copy brother Ziofu." The little leopard pouted, "If I could figure it out, would I still copy it? I just copied it if I couldn't figure it out." Ziofu had already written, raised his head and said with a smile to the 2 of them, "Beizhu's has been written, and our homework is not difficult. It can be finished in half an hour at most." He put Beizhu's homework aside to let the ink dry, turned his head and smiled gently at her, "It's getting late, you go back to sleep first, I'll take back your homework for you later, you can just read it twice when you get up tomorrow." Beizhu happily jumped off the soft couch, "Then I'll go back to my room first, you guys write slowly, if it's too late at night, don't go back to your house, let's squeeze with 4th brother." Qi Heiran, who was outside the window, turned around and left with an incomparably solemn expression. How old was he when he fell in love with Aling? How old was Aling then? A sense of crisis rose in his heart. That was the daughter he held in his hands. How could someone just take it away? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1438. Xiaofu felt very uncomfortable. Recently, the fourth uncle always stared at him, and always ordered him to do things, taking up all his rest time. Xiaofu couldn't help thinking, how did he offend fourth uncle? Xiaofu couldn't figure it out, so he could only sneak to Beizu and Xiaobeizai while his fourth uncle was not paying attention. But Beizu and Little Leopard were even more confused. Did you offend my father? Beizu frowned and said, my father is upright. If you do something wrong, my father will definitely say it clearly and won't play tricks. Little Leopard nodded, at most, you will be punished for copying books, or you will be beaten. The siblings came to the same conclusion, you must be thinking too much. Seeing that they were sure of what they said, Xiaofu also thought about his fourth uncle's character, and doubted himself, could it be that I'm overthinking it? And Chi Heiran, who just found out that Xiaofu had slipped away to find his daughter, was sulking with beard and staring eyes. How could that kid always find the time to find Beizu? Mu Yangling looked at him curiously, and asked, what's the matter with you recently? You always look down on Xiaofu. If you continue to toss about it, be careful what the child thinks. When the time comes, Zijin will say that you are partial. Chi Heiran has always treated Xiaoan and Xiaofu like his own, who should be beaten and petted, and because they are the children of good brothers, Chi Heiran usually dotes on them even more. This is the first time Mu Yangling has seen Chi Heiran order Xiaofu like this in so many years. Chi Heiran felt very helpless about his wife's innocence. Do you think that kid is a good one? He is spying on our daughter, full of bad taste, just like his father. Mu Yangling didn't have tea in her mouth, so she didn't spit it out, but was choked by her own saliva. She stared and asked, what did you say? Seeing that her voice had changed, Chi Heiran thought she was worried about her daughter, so he hugged her to comfort her. It's okay, I'm watching. That kid didn't succeed. At this stage he can also do homework for Beizu, and study for homework, that's all. Mu Yangling let go of the heart he was holding, then looked at him with eyes full of surprise, and asked curiously, where did you see it? She also knew about Xiaofu's homework for Beizu, and punished them several times for this, but this kind of thing has become the norm, just like the little lion and tiger head who have been copying Xiaoan's homework. The three of them are willing and cooperative. She can resist it for a while, but not for a lifetime. She only saw friendship and family affection from it, but really couldn't see love. Mu Yangling asked hesitantly, did Xiaofu kiss the orb? Chi Heiran jumped up, dare he? Then he stared at Mu Yangling, what are you thinking about? Is your daughter such a casual person? Mu Yangling was completely relieved, and waved, then what are you worried about? I think you are overthinking. Chi Heiran snorted, I didn't think too much about it. If he didn't think about it, he would be so kind to Beizu. And after Beizu entered the upper study room, every time he got into trouble, it was because of him. They have a deep brother-sister relationship. When Little Leopard was being bullied, why didn't Beizu go to help him out? That's because Little Leopard has the ability to take revenge and go back. Xiaofu is weak and can't fight. Pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger is even more abominable. Chi Heiran snorted, Xiaofu's IQ is just like his father's, how could he be bullied? Mu Yangling saw that he was so confident, he couldn't help looking at him suspiciously. What basis do you have? You can't just rely on this fluffy thing to define the relationship between the two children, right? How old is Xiaofu this year? Small. But Chi Heiran said, you were only 9 years old back then. Didn't the master fall in love with you at a glance? Mu Yangling couldn't help kicking him, so you are such a beast. Chi Heiran hurriedly jumped onto the bed, and shouted, back then, I had a crush on you at first sight, and then slowly fell in love with you. Xiaofu and Beizu grew up together, and the relationship will only deepen, and they may not be able to separate in the future. Opened. Chi Heiran was even more regretful when he said this. It's all my fault that men and women have different seats at 7 years old. When Beizu turns 7 years old, she shouldn't be allowed to sit and eat with Ziofa like this. The two children not only sit and eat together, but when they go out to play, I will hug you and carry you for a while when they go out to play, and they will sit together on the same couch when they are indoors, so they should not be too close. Ever since he noticed that the atmosphere between them was not right, Chi Heiran paid attention everywhere. Only then did he realize that Beizu and Ziofa were indeed too close. It would be fine if Ziofa was his own, or Beizu was a boy, but Ziofa was not his own, and Beizu was a girl. This intimacy is more ambiguous. Chi Heiran discussed with his wife, I think the two should be separated. Beizu is still young, so they can't be so close. Mu Yangling hesitated, are you sure those two children are interested in each other? Chi Heiran nodded seriously, looking at them is just like seeing us back then. Mu Yangling immediately counted the blood relationship between Beizu and Ziofa with his fingers, and finally heaved a sigh of relief. Although the two children are within the 5th server, they happen to be on the 4th server, and their blood relationship is far away. Although they have not reached the ideal state of science, if they insist on being together, she doesn't have to use this as an excuse to break them up. Chi Heiran was still looking at his wife eagerly, hoping that she would come up with an idea. Mu Yangling patted his head sympathetically and said, Heiran, my daughter is going to get married, you can stop it for a while, but you can't stop it forever. Chi Heiran pouted dissatisfied and said, our orb is still young. You can make up your own mind about this matter, Mu Yangling said calmly, but unless you can do it in a stealthy way, if your daughter finds out, I'm afraid you will pierce the paper on the window, and it will be even worse. The two children may have developed a friendship now, but they definitely don't know it. If Chi Heiran intervenes to let them find out, and accidentally breaks it at that time, it may only increase their relationship. When Chi Heiran was ignorant back then, he was just subconsciously being nice to Mu Yangling, arguing with her and bullying her in order to attract her attention. But after Chi Ziyuan said that he would help him beg Mu Yangling to be his wife, he began to curry favor with Mu Yangling in a planned way, and consciously regarded himself as Mu Yangling's fiancé, which made their relationship grow by leaps and bounds. The situation of ignorance is completely different from the situation of piercing the window paper. Chi Heiran immediately became distressed, then what reason should I find to separate them? Mu Yangling shrugged and said that he was helpless. Regarding the emotional destination of the children, she is more willing to let them go with the flow, as long as the person she chooses is not a person with a problem with character, she will probably agree. Chi Heiran doesn't have much opinion on the marriage of his sons, anyway, they are men, and they still marry their daughters into the family, so they can't be wronged, but daughters are different. Chi Heiran felt that Beizu was worthy of the best in the world. Of course, it wasn't that Ziofa was bad, the key was that his daughter was still young. How could Ziofa be so beastly and aim at his daughter now? The current Chi Heiran can't listen to things like childhood sweethearts. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1439. Before Chi Heiran could figure out a way to separate Beizu Ziofa without trace, Fan Zijin came looking for him. Although he handed over his son to Chi Heiran and Mu Yangling for education, he didn't just let go of it completely. He would still ask his son about his homework every day after returning home, in order to cultivate the relationship between father and son. So he soon discovered that his son seemed to have encountered some troubles recently, and he was always frowning when facing him. Fan Zijin couldn't help but care a few more words. Ziofa has been looking for the reason why the fourth uncle is targeting him recently. He doesn't think that the fourth uncle is partial, because after years of getting along, he feels that his status in the heart of the fourth uncle is not much lower than that of the little leopard. So this honest boy attributed the reasons to himself. He felt that his fourth uncle was so honest and tolerant, so he must have done something wrong accidentally to make him so targeted. He also explicitly asked the fourth uncle, but the fourth uncle always looked very strange, shaking his head to show that he had done nothing wrong. Xiaofu is even more sure that he accidentally did something wrong, so the two sisters recalled everything they did in the past month, and they must correct their mistakes as soon as possible. He also really wanted to go out to play, and he didn't want to be called by his fourth uncle to do his homework in front of him in the big study every day, and he had to copy Buddhist scriptures when he was done. That's right, Chi Heiran couldn't think of a good way to separate the two of them, so he could only take Xiaofu to his study and let him do his homework, and after finishing his homework, he would copy Buddhist scriptures, euphemistically saying, "Pray for Daki." Xiaofu has already recalled everything today, specifically what he ate for breakfast, but he still can't find the reason why his fourth uncle is targeting him. Thinking of the deep relationship between his father and his fourth uncle and their understanding of each other, Xiaofu immediately decided to ask his father to help him find out the reason when he heard his father ask him. He couldn't find it, maybe because the authorities were obsessed with it. His father was extremely smart and knew the fourth uncle quite well, so he should be able to find out the reason. After listening to his son's narration, Fan Zijin only came to one conclusion: Chi Heiran was deliberately targeting his son. Of course, in order to let Chi Heiran still maintain a perfect image in his son's heart, Fan Zijin didn't point out the matter, but just touched his head and comforted him. "You don't need to worry about this matter, father will take care of it for you. What should you do tomorrow? Just do what?" Xiaofu looked at his father staringly, and nodded in admiration. After his son left, Fan Zijin slowly put away the official documents on the desk, beckoned to Yanmo, and asked with a smile, "What is Heiran doing recently?" Yan Mo bowed and said, "Fourth master has always been in the mansion and never went out." "A few days." Yan Mo recalled it for a while, and said, "It's been about 7 or 8 days. It coincides with the time Xiaofu said." Fan Zijin lowered his eyes and pondered for a moment, then said, "Find a few people to ask him out tomorrow. It's best to hang them up until night, don't let him return to the mansion before dinner." Yan Mo responded, and exited respectfully. Fan Zijin sneered, he also wanted to know why Heiran targeted his son alone. If Xiaofu did something wrong, he wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death. With Haoran's character, if Xiaofu really wanted to do something wrong, he should have brought him into the study to reason with him. If he couldn't explain it, he would beat him up, and if he didn't obey him, he would be fine to kneel down. He was obviously guilty of avoiding answering Xiaofu's question. Since he was guilty, why did he still target Xiaofu? With the friendship between the two of them wearing a pair of pants, how could Heiran treat Xiaofu like that? Fan Zijin couldn't think of a reason, so he was naturally very curious about the reason for his doing so. He wanted to go to the palace to look for it first, and then ask him if he couldn't find the reason. Fan Zijin is smart, not only in IQ, but also in EQ. When he really wanted to find out the reason for something, no one could hide it from him, not to mention that Chi Heiran hadn't taken any measures to hide it. So the next afternoon, I drove straight into the palace and saw 3 children playing together in the garden. The little leopard was squatting by the lake to dig mud and play with mud. I don't know what Xiaofu said. And when his son Xiaofu gently took out the handkerchief to wipe her sweat, Fan Zijin realized something. After experiencing the childhood sweetheart era when Heiran and Mu Yangling saw each other, it was difficult for Fan Zijin to pretend that he didn't understand. Then he gets annoyed. Could it be that his son is not worthy of the orb? Fan Zijin's eyes were burning with anger, and ordered the servants of the palace to say, "Go and bring me a chair." The servants of the Wangfu didn't regard Fan Zijin as a guest at all, they immediately bent over and responded, and after a while, not only a chair, but also a round table were brought in, with some melon and fruit snacks and tea on it. Fanzijin sat under the shade of a tree and watched the three childhood sweethearts playing by the lake from a distance. The more I look at Fanzijin, the more I feel emotional, and the more I look at him, the more angry I get. It's exactly like the scene of their 3 teenage years, but the little leopard took on his role, and they became Xiaofu and Beizu in love with each other. Back then, he didn't prevent Qi Heiran from marrying Mu Yangling, he chose to forget about the matter of sowing discord, but now, Qi Heiran has become an evil parent. Fanzijin's heart was burning with fire, especially when he saw a tall figure hurriedly rushing into the garden. Fanzijin's heart became like a prairie fire. Qi Heiran managed to get rid of a few friends who had a drink appointment, and when he rushed back, he heard that the three children got together to play again. He was afraid that his daughter would suffer, so he hurried over. Qi Heiran could only see a pair of villains by the lake, but never saw Fanzijin sitting under the shade of a tree, so he only saw him when Fanzijin's sinister voice sounded. Seeing him drifting past him blindly, Fanzijin was so angry that his nose turned crooked, and he couldn't help but said sinisterly, "Yo, Prince Rong is back." Qi Heiran turned his head, only to see Fanzijin sitting not far away under the shade of a tree, with a table beside him, filled with melon and fruit snacks, holding a cup of tea in his hand, looking at him with a smile on his face. Qi Heiran shuddered, stepped forward cautiously, and asked in a guilty whisper, "Why is cousin here? Are you done with your business?" Fanzijin leaned on the chair and looked up at him, showing a slight smile. "Ran, how many times have I told you, don't be guilty and just call me cousin. Look, I didn't know that you did something that I was sorry for, but now I don't think so. It's hard to know." Qi Heiran immediately shut his mouth tightly and looked at him eagerly. Fanzijin took a sip of tea, put down the teacup, tapped on the grass, and said with a gentle smile, "Sit down." Qi Heiran looked at Fanzijin, who was sitting on the chair, then at the grass under his feet, and finally sat down cross-legged tremblingly. Fanzijin looked down at him and showed a satisfied smile. He looked at the three children by the lake with some regret, and said with emotion, "In the blink of an eye, the children have grown up so much." Qi Heiran's hairs stood on end, he felt danger. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1440. Fanzijin leaned forward, looked at him with a half-smile and said, "You see how much better Xiaofu and Beizu get along, but it's a pity that time passes, and in a few years they won't be able to play together so unscrupulously again. I don't know how sad the two children are, why don't you?" Fanzijin said with a wide smile on his face as he stared at him, "Let's be in-laws, so that the two children don't have to be separated because of gender differences." Qi Heiran's hair stood on end, and he really wanted to jump up to object, but under the gaze of the aloof Fanzijin, he could only stammer, "The two children are still young, isn't it too early to get engaged?" The more Qi Heiran spoke, the lower his voice became, and he seemed more guilty. Fanzijin put away the smile on his face, got up and walked in front of him, looked down at him condescendingly for a while, couldn't help kicking him with his toes, and asked, "Are you looking down on my son?" Qi Heiran shook his head quickly, and looked up at him bluntly. Fanzijin snorted coldly, "Then why do you keep declining? You even tormented my son. Don't talk about the reason of being young, you were not much older than Xiaofu when you chased after Mu Yangling's ass." Qi Heiran became dejected, he finally knew where he was wrong. How could he play tricks in front of Fanzijin, a fine man? This is a good time, and he can't hide the matter. If he hadn't intervened, with Fanzijin's concern for the children, he might not have discovered it until the children said they were kissing each other, but because he wanted to keep Xiaofu away, Fanzijin would have discovered it early. Qi Heiran lowered his waist and shoulders, and looked at his daughter with great reluctance, "But my orb is indeed very small, she was raised in the palm of my master, so naturally I have to find someone who is obedient to her in the future. My in-law's family, at the very least, can't be much worse than my master." Fan Zijian twitched the corners of his mouth, and realized that this person was simply reluctant to give up on his daughter, not to mention that Ziofu was his current choice. Even if it was the Jade Emperor, he would pick out a whole bunch of others. Fan Zijian felt relieved, not because he looked down on his son. He calmly sat back in his chair, took a sip of the tea on the table, raised his legs, and asked leisurely, "In this world, there are many people chasing fame and fortune, but few people are quiet and indifferent. Bezo has you as a father now. There is still my eldest cousin, and she is the only second daughter in the royal family. With the love of my eldest cousin for you and her, the title of princess will be indispensable when she gets married. How much do you think there is in this situation? Can a person pursue the orb without distracting thoughts?" Chi Heiran frowned. Even if she is a princess, there are many restrictions on her in this world. Since the past dynasties, how many princesses have been able to live as they please after marriage? How much did they pay? Fan Zijian sighed sadly. After all, I'm pretty good at Dachi. The princess doesn't need to marry, and marriage is relatively free to a certain extent. Neither the eldest cousin nor you will use the princess to marry and secure power, but even so, women are still born with power. Weak, Bezu was born as a daughter, she was doomed to swallow this loss from birth. Aside from other things, the imperial court stipulates that concubines are not allowed to take concubines, but they don't restrict the princess to accept the house. Fan Zijian curled his lips disdainfully when he said this, although it is really not a big deal to me and other men, but look at it, Ling Bian knows that this is a big deal in their women's eyes. Where can you find a son-in-law for her who will only have one precious pearl for the rest of her life? Even if you find it, how do you know that the other party is not forced by your power or has some conspiracy? He can't mess around in the princess mansion, but he can recruit prostitutes to enjoy flowers. Who in the world will blame him? If Bezu even has this, if you can't tolerate it, you're jealous of a woman, are you willing to let Bezu suffer this criticism? Fan Zijian saw that Chi Heiran lowered his head and pondered like a frost-beaten eggplant, so he knew he had listened. You are willing to make an oath to a Ling, and people outside will quietly talk about a Ling's jealousy. If Bezu's future son-in-law is reluctant, even if she only shows a little talk or reluctance outside, the world is afraid that she will be trampled on the ground. What's more, in addition to the relationship between husband and wife, there is also the relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Fan Zijian sighed. No matter how powerful you are, if Bezu marries, she will be someone else's daughter-in-law. She can live in the princess mansion, but she still has to do her best to be filial to her in-laws. Yes, you must also support your husband's family, otherwise. Fan Zijian sighed faintly, and before he finished speaking, Chi Heiran had already figured out that his daughter would be exhausted from running around and lead a miserable life. Chi Heiran said with tears in his eyes, "In the future, the son-in-law that my master finds for him will definitely be obedient to her. The life and future of his whole family are in my hands. My master sees how he dares to make Baozu angry." Fan Zijian sneered, pointed casually into the garden, and said, "Then what are you looking for? Just bring a servant from the mansion and you will be satisfied." He sneered and said, "If you find such a son-in-law, Bezu can do whatever he wants, but what kind of character is a son-in-law who is willing to be manipulated like this? Could it be that she will be at peace when she marries such a worthless one? That's right, all girls love talents, so why should her daughter find such a spineless and frustrated person? So, is there anyone in this world who is more suitable for Bezu than my Ziofu?" Fan Zijian asked complacently. Chi Heiran looked up at him blankly. Fan Zijian raised his chin to the three children by the lake, and motioned him to look. How well do they get along? I don't need to say much about Ziofu's intelligence. After growing up, there is no shortage of talent and ambition. As for look, you can tell by looking at me, I will definitely be a handsome and unrestrained young talent in the future, and the orb is a good match for him. Now Ziofu is taught by you and Aling." He cast a sideways glance at Chi Heiran, and said somewhat uncomfortably, if you want him to be devoted to Bezu, you can start training him from now on. My fan family doesn't need your support from Prince Rong, and you don't have to worry about your in-laws. I treat Bezu as my own daughter. If there is any disagreement between the husband and wife in the future, I don't know where I will stand. As for your cousin, Fan Zijin curled his lips, do you think she is the one who grooms your daughter-in-law? Chi Heiran shook his head again and again. Xiao Xia has a gentle personality and is still timid, how could it be possible to grind orbs? What's more, she still regards Bezu as her own daughter, and she and Aling are best friends. Do you think there is anyone in this world who is more suitable for Bezu than my Xiaofu? Chi Heiran hesitated for a while, but finally shook his head and said honestly, no more. The corners of Fan Zijin's mouth couldn't help but twitched, revealing a happy smile. Find a time to settle this marriage, so that you won't always be a monster. Chi Heiran shook his head again and again, and said, no, I have to ask Aling's opinion on the matter of marriage, so I can't just make a decision like this. The smile on Fan Zijin's face collapsed, he glanced at him expressionlessly, got up and left. He wasted so much saliva. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1441. Chi Heiran looked at his brother's back, then at the two little heads that got together again, and finally decided to go out and separate his precious daughter from Xiaofu. Even if Bezu really wants to marry Xiaofu in the future, she can't just be so close now. Fan Zijin didn't go out, but turned to look for Mu Yangling. Since his son has taken a fancy to Bezu, he has to ask for it for him. Fan Zijin went directly to the backyard, but no one stopped him, but someone reported to Mu Yangling early on. Mu Yangling was very surprised. Fan Zijin always looked for Heiran when he needed something, and rarely found her here. Although he was puzzled, he went out to meet people. Fan Zijin's first words were, let's have a son and daughter together. Mu Yangling blinked, and it took him a while to realize that he was talking about Bezu and Xiaofu. Why do you think of mentioning this? Mu Yangling asked suspiciously, is it from Xiaofu? No, Fan Zijin knew what she was thinking, and said honestly, I saw that they are suitable, and the two children are childhood sweethearts and have feelings for each other, so I mentioned it. Mu Yangling breathed a sigh of relief, she thought Xiaofu was mentioned by Fan Zijin by Xiaofu. Fan Zijin kept paying attention to the expression on her face, and couldn't help frowning when he saw this. Why, do you think Xiaofu is not worthy of the orb? Mu Yangling quickly shook his head and explained, it would be great if Bezu can match Xiaofu. Heiran and I watched Xiaofu grow up, and our two families have this kind of relationship. Bezu will definitely not be wronged if she can marry into your family. Seeing that Fan Zijin's face softened, she continued, it's just that the children are still young, and I don't want to force them. Although we have this intention, it depends on their wishes. If they also have this idea, we can wait until they grow up, betroth them. And it doesn't count if I say this alone, I have to ask Heiran what he means, Mu Yangling said with a smile, he loves Bezu very much, and he must not be willing to let his daughter get married. Fan Zijin sneered when he heard the words, and said, you just say that you will travel with Bezu as soon as he gets married. You can see whether he is willing to part with it or not. Mu Yangling blushed. Seeing this, Fan Zijin sneered again and again, Heiran loves his sons and daughters, children are important in his heart, but I'm afraid they are not as good as Mu Yangling altogether. He stood up and said, since that's the case, we've made an agreement. As long as the two children don't object, we will get engaged when they are a few years older. After finishing speaking, he turned around and left, only to run into Chi Heiran, who was in a hurry as soon as he went out. Chi Heiran jumped anxiously, why did you come to Aling? Didn't I tell you that I want to discuss with Aling? Fan Zijan's chest hurt from the bump, and he couldn't help rubbing his chest. Then he pushed the person away aggressively, and said as he went out of the room, when you say that the daylily is cold, I have already agreed with Aling. Let's fight from today onwards. We are the family of sons and daughters. Mu Yangling opened his mouth. Didn't he say that he had to wait for the two children to grow up? Before she could tell, Fan Zijan had already walked out of the yard quickly. Chi Heiran turned his head and stared at Mu Yangling in surprise and astonishment when he heard the words, "Why did you order our daughter out?" Mu Yangling rolled his eyes at him and said, "You can believe whatever he says, you don't know Zijan's mouth, you can only believe 3 points of what he says. I can't tell you about such a big thing as a daughter's marriage. Shall we make a deal after discussing it?" Chi Heiran breathed a sigh of relief when he heard the words, and then became annoyed again, gnashing his teeth and saying, "He lied to me again." Mu Yangling dragged him into the inner room, drove all the maids out, and asked carefully, why did Zijan suddenly think of betrothing the two children? When she was pregnant with a tiger-headed lion cub before, Fan Zijan mentioned her finger pulp as a marriage or something. Later, seeing that the two parties had sons, and the children of the two houses were as close as brothers, she never mentioned this again. It has been 10 years since Baozu was born. Not only Fan Zijan, but also Xiao Xiao's family have never said that they want her to be their daughter-in-law. It's also her daughter who is too tough. Since she was able to climb, she got together with a few brothers. After she could walk and run, she followed her brothers and cousins up mountains and rivers, climbing trees and tiles, and she was skinnier than boys. When she played with Xiaofu, Mu Yangling often regarded her as a boy and Xiaofu as a daughter, so she always regarded the two children as brothers and sisters, and never thought about it deeply. If Heiran hadn't been following her like a demon these days, she might have allowed the two children to continue playing like childhood sweethearts. Knowing that Fan Zijan brought it up because of Chi Heiran's actions in the past few days when she noticed the personal relationship between the two children, she couldn't help but raise her brows. Are you sure the two children really have mutual intentions? Don't treat brother-sister relationship as a love. Chi Heiran snorted and said, Master, can you still admit your mistake? Don't forget that there is a little leopard next to him. The kid poking it aside is like a superfluous one, but that silly boy didn't realize it yet, but he leaned forward vigorously to follow the watch. Brother and sister play. Mu Yangling. Mu Yangling choked for a while, finally nodded and said, actually, it's fine if they are interested in each other. Mu Yangling glanced at her husband, and said, our daughter's temper is arrogant at best, and domineering at worst. She is like a queen. I have always worried that she married someone else's house because I was angry with the tip of the needle. It's bullying others by forcing one side. But whether it's the former or the latter, you must feel uncomfortable and easily criticized, but it's different when you marry Xiaofu. Mu Yangling thought about Xiaofu's character, and said, although Xiaofu has some temperament, he holds grudges, but he is very kind to his own people. If Beizu can win his approval, he will definitely be held in his hands. Moreover, Xiaofu can bend and stretch, but our girl is stubborn, and she shrinks when she pokes him, so there is no way to quarrel. Besides, Mu Yangling smiled slightly, glanced at her husband and said with a smile, based on your friendship with Zijan, and my friendship with my cousin, Beizu will never be bullied by her in-laws. Although Fan Zijan is treacherous, his Achilles heel is Chi Heiran, he can't beat him to death, and Mu Yangling is completely at ease when his daughter marries into his family. And Xiaoxia's personality is soft, she has no idea how to deal with things, she doesn't know how to bully Beizu. If she does, she will listen to Fan Zijan after she sneezes. So is there a better in-laws family in this world? As long as Beizu and Xiaofu agree with each other, it will be perfect. Chi Heiran was persuaded by Fan Zijan when he was in the garden, and now he heard that Aling also agreed, so he naturally couldn't object anymore, but he didn't want to settle the marriage early. let them grind it out, if our daughter sees why not go to Xiaofu. After all, I still can't bear to marry my daughter. Mu Yangling smiled when he heard the words, thought for a while, and nodded in response, then we will procrastinate. She held her daughter in her hand for more than 10 years, and she didn't want to give up. But don't stop Xiaofu anymore, Mu Yangling said with a smile, don't tell me that the children were not enlightened, but they became enlightened after being stopped by you. When the time comes when your daughter makes a fuss, can you bear it? Naturally, Chi Heiran couldn't bear it. Beizu didn't cry yet, but just looked at him with wet eyes. As a father, he couldn't bear to reject his daughter. Therefore, Chi Heiran gritted his teeth, and decided to let them continue playing together. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1442. Xiaofu took the food box to find Beizu, and gave her her favorite dish. Beizu was very happy, and said while eating, Brother Xiaofu, can you give me the meat tomorrow, and I will exchange it with you for vegetables. Xiaofu looked at the delicate and lovely orb, and thought of what his father said to him last night. His heart softened so badly, he nodded fiercely and said, okay, I will let you eat. Princess Mingzu watched from the side and couldn't help laughing, teasing them, Xiaofu, why do you only give it to your younger sister and not to your older sister? I am also your cousin. Xiaofu tilted his head and said, do you also like to eat meat? I think you prefer vegetarians. Princess Mingzu looked at her own food box, then at Beizu's, rolled her eyes and said, I also like some meat dishes. Xiaofu immediately said, Sister Mingzu, tell me what you like to eat, I will go home and ask my mother to prepare it and bring it to the palace for you. Mingzu gave him an angry look, forget it, you didn't give it to me sincerely, why should I force it? Seeing that her sister was sad, Beizu immediately put away all the meat and vegetables in her food box, and said flatteringly, Sister, don't be sad, I'll give you mine. Mingzu pursed her lips as she looked at the dish that had been dialed out, and then dialed it back. She even dialed back half of her own meal, patted her head and said, my sister is just joking with you, you should eat by yourself. She held the food box and stood up, winking at the two of them and said, you guys eat, I won't bother you here. Baozu was confused, but Xiaofu blushed and lowered his head. Seeing that the tips of her little cousin's ears were turning red, Mingzu couldn't help being stunned, then walked out laughing. She used to tease the two of them habitually, but she didn't expect to discover such a secret by accident today. Beizu was even more puzzled by her smile. After thinking for a while, she only thought that she was still doing it for the food, so she poked Xiaofu and said, you don't want to give up the food to Sister Mingzu and you have to find a more plausible reason. Bringing in food from the palace, who doesn't know that the food coming in from outside the palace has to be strictly inspected? Will it still be edible when it's delivered to us? Xiaofu's ears turned redder, but he breathed a sigh of relief, and murmured, I'll just pay more attention next time. He looked up at Beizu, and saw that she was pouting so cutely, his heart couldn't help but stay behind, and his face turned even redder. Occasionally, Beizu turned her head, seeing him startled, she quickly reached out to touch his forehead, and asked, why is your face so red, do you have a fever? Xiaofu sat without moving, and let her touch it upright. After a while, she frowned and said, I don't have a fever, could it be that I have some other illness? Xiaofu's face turned even redder, and he held the hand that grabbed the orb in his hand, and whispered, no, it will be fine in a while. Since being called into the study by his father last night, Xiaofu really felt that he was sick, his heartbeat has been irregular, and he was jumping uncontrollably as if he had a heart disease. Yesterday evening, Xiaofu had a great time at Prince Rong's mansion, and after dinner, he went back to his home happily. There is no way, the gentlemen were in a good mood yesterday, and the homework assigned to them was directly reduced by half, and he had already finished all the homework in his extracurricular time in the afternoon. So Ziofa went home much earlier. But as soon as he entered the door, he was invited to his father's study by his servants. He thought his father was going to test his homework, so he went in respectfully. Who knew that his father was sitting behind the desk, and the first thing he said when he saw him was, "Ziofu, will my father arrange a marriage for you?" Ziofa froze on the spot, then stared at his father with wide eyes, unable to recover for a while. He didn't know whether he was happy or not, but he didn't feel happy at all, so he felt that he should be unhappy. But what his father was going to do, unless the fourth uncle opened up and made trouble with him, he would not change his mind. Ziofa felt that his eyes were a little wet, and was about to delay time because he was still young, but his father nailed him on the spot with the second sentence. Fan Zijin looked at his son slowly and said, "How about ordering you the orb from your fourth uncle's family? Let her be your wife." Ziofa's heart skipped 2 beats at once, and then began to beat violently. He felt his face was burning red, a sense of joy swept through his heart, and the corners of his mouth could not be suppressed. Fan Zijin looked satisfied, nodded slightly and said, "It seems that you are satisfied with this marriage." Ziofa blushed and said, "Is Beizu willing?" Fan Zijin raised his eyebrows, and the first question his son asked was not whether his parents agreed or disagreed, but Beizu. He pondered, could it be that his son is going to be Heiran's second son, and will be controlled by his wife for the rest of his life? Thinking wildly in her heart, she said truthfully, "Most likely she doesn't know about it yet. Your fourth uncle and aunt won't tell her. At least you have to wait until she turns 14. Most of the joy in Ziofa's heart disappeared, and he thought about it seriously and asked, "What if Beizu doesn't want to?" Fan Zijin despised him, "Then won't you go after him?" Xiaofu blushed and lowered his head. Fan Zijin sneered, leaned back in the chair relaxedly, and said, "Do you know how your fourth uncle married your fourth aunt?" Xiaofu raised his head to look at his father brightly. Fan Zijin raised the corner of his mouth lightly and said, 3 words, shameless. If you can learn half of your fourth uncle, you will probably be able to catch up with the orb. Xiaofu's face was full of black lines. He knew that his father had a sharp mouth and a bean heart. No matter how good his relationship with his fourth uncle was, he would never let anyone talk, but he never thought that his father would not let people go to this point. Seeing his son's expression of disbelief, Fan Zijin took a sip of his tea and beckoned, "Go and bring the stool, Daddy will tell you how shameless your fourth uncle is." Ziofu hesitated, thinking that his uncle and aunt were very affectionate, so he finally moved a stool and sat next to his father to listen. "My father said that the first step for the fourth uncle to impress the fourth aunt is to be kind to the fourth aunt shamelessly, regardless of whether the other party accepts it or not. It is to be nice to her anyway. Before the other party asks, you have to think about what she thinks first." Ziofu. He didn't understand why the word shameless had to be added to a sentence that was obviously normal, but seeing his father saying it happily, Xiaofu decided to block those 3 words himself, and then began to apply the method that fourth uncle used to on the orb. Therefore, he would pick beautiful flowers for her to plug in the morning, and then go to the palace to study together. At noon, he would give her her favorite dishes. After school, he would help her with her homework, and then take her to play. During the holidays, he would take her to the streets to play. If she wanted to fight, he would help her get beaten up. If she wanted to curse someone, he would help her with advice. Beizu feels that she has been living a very comfortable life recently, and there is no better day than this.